Test one, two. All right, we're going to start in a second. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. This is the Town of Chatham Zoning Board of Appeals, December 5th, 2024 meeting. It's 3 o'clock, and this meeting is a comprehensive permit 40B training session with Town Council, who is going to be remote. Pursuant to Governor Healy's March 29th, 2023 signing of the Acts of 2023, extending certain COVID measures adopted during the state of emergency, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, this meeting of the Chatham Zoning Board of Appeals is being conducted in person and via remote participation. Every effort will be made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings as provided for in the order. A reminder that persons who'd like to listen to this meeting while in progress may do so by calling 508-945-4410, conference ID 945-847-572#, or join the meeting online through the link in the posted agenda. Well, this is a live broadcast and simulcast on Chatham TV, Xfinity Channel 1072. Despite our best efforts, we may not be able to provide real-time access. We will post a record of this meeting on the town's website as soon as possible. Again, this is a comprehensive permit 40B training sessions with Town Council, and I see him on the screen. Welcome. If you could just say your name, sir.
Jay Tallerman.
Okay. Take it away.
Take it away. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for letting me do this remotely. It's a busy time of year for everyone. I'm pleased to do this. I don't think even when I was previously town council, we did a 40B. We were aware of a few. I know that there's a few longtime members here, but in that we have at least two coming down the pike, I thought it would be, or everyone thought it would be a good idea to get a bit of a refresher on this. So I'm going to just start talking about kind of my usual approach to this stuff, but I think this works best when folks chime in, ask a question, have a comment that may be important to you. I will keep talking about 40Bs because I've done a whole lot of them, but there may be unique things that you want to speak of that would apply to your potential experience here. So 40B, as you probably all know, is what they call the Massachusetts Affordable Housing Statute. It's also called the Comprehensive Permit Statute because the permits that come out of the process are called comprehensive permits. The Chapter 40B was enacted in 1969. One of the original purposes of the statute was to make sure that there was ready access for housing opportunities for returning soldiers from Vietnam, but also it was key to the legislature at the time that there be a bit of a carrot approach to the development of affordable housing, whereby there would be some waiver of zoning and some limitations to your overall jurisdiction in exchange for affordable units. However, that is not how 40B evolved over the next 50 or plus years. The way it evolved was much more of a stick approach, and that is that the scope of 40B expanded and the level of deference that local zoning boards had under the statute has lessened and decreased, and it has been a particularly difficult statute for towns to deal with. It has also been an excellent tool for towns to perhaps get around some zoning, planning, conservation, and other local bylaws that might otherwise stand in the way of projects that people like. Unfortunately, the folks that are using 40B as a means of bypassing good and effective local bylaws outnumber the good projects. Now, I am not making a value judgment with respect to any future projects. In fact, it appears that there's a lot of cooperative projects on the horizon, and we hope for good, smooth hearings. But it's been controversial because an applicant applying under 40B is essentially applying for a master permit. And that's a permit for all zoning relief, for all relief under a local wetland bylaw, a local stormwater bylaw, a local subdivision bylaw, and any other local bylaw. It doesn't waive State Wetland Protection Act, and it doesn't waive Title V or state level permits like a larger treatment plant for wastewater. But it is substantial in nature, and the deference under the process goes to the applicant. What I mean by that is, in a normal special permit, for example, or a variance or anything else that a zoning board is going to grant, if you say no to someone or you impose sharp conditions on someone, overwhelmingly likely that if you did your job and you're acting within accordance of the general parameters of the law, a judge is going to defer to your local judgment and uphold your decision. In the overwhelming number of the cases that we prevail in those on the municipal side. Under 40B, the opposite is true. We have, I'll just say it, a pretty a terrible track record at trying to win cases where a board says no, or where a board imposes very strict conditions that an applicant doesn't like. The way the statute is set up is that if an applicant can demonstrate that the town has not met its 10% affordable housing burden or requirement, then there is a presumption on in favor of waiving all local bylaws and conditions unless a board or town can demonstrate that the impacts caused by the project would outweigh the presumptive benefit of affordable housing. That argument has by and large been unsuccessful in the legal sense. That doesn't mean, however, that a town is without tools or a board is without tools when you're faced with areas of disagreement with a prospective developer. The statute is designed to be an expedited permitting process by putting it in all the local permits in the hands of one board, or almost all the local permits in the hands of one board. However, the way this has played out over the years is that the process is anything but expedited. And where fights ensue between a board and a town and a developer, they can go on for years. And very often there's settlement there, not always, but very often the mere fact that the process is so complex and complicated is a bit of leverage that we enjoy. And again, I am painting the picture of situations where there are projects coming in under 40B that you may not like, because that is where we get involved more often than not. The projects that are cooperative, I think we usually find a way to figure out a set of conditions that gets a good project off the ground while still preserving all the important stuff that we like to preserve, everything from appearance of things to the height of things to screening to use of municipal infrastructure and all those other kinds of things. So that's the kind of thumbnail sketch of what 40B is. Any questions on that before I move to kind of process related issues?
Are there any? Seeing none? No, please go ahead.
Okay, so let's talk about the process a little bit. It is longer, I think, than they originally conceived of. The way this works is that an applicant has to satisfy three things before they can apply to a zoning board of appeals. They have to show that they either own the property or have control of it by way of an option agreement, a purchase and sale agreement, or otherwise. That's usually pretty easy. The next thing that they have to do is that they have to show, in the case of a private developer, that they are what we call a limited dividend entity, which is an entity that is bound through their corporate charter and other agreements that they have to sign to making a limited amount of profit. For sale projects, that's 20% total profit. And for rental projects, the formula is a little bit more complicated, but it's essentially 10% return per year on that by way of an average. And that there is a certain amount of controversy over those issues, but by and large, to get over the first hurdle of being a limited dividend entity, all you have to do is pledge to execute what we call a regulatory agreement, which is an agreement that you would be signing with either the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Development or Mass Housing Finance Agency or Mass Housing Partnership. Those are the three entities that are generally involved in this. And the town is a party to those regulatory agreements in some, but not all instances. So that's, again, not a super high hurdle because it's just signing a piece of paper. The third requirement is that a project has to have a subsidy. That subsidy can be either dollars, like a tax credit program under the Affordable Housing Tax Credit Program administered by the state, or some other kind of HUD grant. More frequently, however, it is a private stream of funding, sometimes known as the New England Fund, but there are some other sources under which is administered through entities like Mass Housing and some other entities. And the technical assistance, and this has been a subject of some controversy too, that those agencies give you is the subsidy that satisfies the statute. Again, I don't think that was originally intended. What was originally intended, in my view, was a strict financial subsidy, but the state has watered that down over the years. An applicant can demonstrate that they've achieved that by applying for and obtaining from one of those subsidizing agencies that I mentioned, what we call a project eligibility letter. It's kind of a go forward letter. And there's a process there. So that process, and this is the most cumbersome part of the pre-application process, that process is that they first apply to the subsidizing agency, laying out all the details of their project, not in the kind of fine detail that will be discussed at the zoning board, but in enough detail that the subsidizing agency understands what the project is. Then the municipality will have usually a 45-day, sometimes longer comment period, and others will be allowed to comment during that time as well. And at that point, the municipality can state its concerns. And those concerns could be esoteric stuff to concerns on infrastructure or legal arguments as to why a project is not entitled to a Chapter 40B. Some of that could be that the town feels that it's achieved one of its safe harbors, such as 10% affordable housing, or a significant amount of land area used for housing, or recent progress even in housing. And the town would lay all that out to the subsidizing agency, as well as suggesting to the subsidizing agency, if the project is to go forward, what the town would be looking for in terms of conditions on approval. Subsidizing agency conducts a site review. There's generally some back and forth, and within a few months, they issue a letter. So that whole process takes 4 or 5 months. Then that letter is good for 2 years, and the applicant has an opportunity to apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals. They generally take a little bit of time because they have to put some plans together. When they apply to the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Zoning Board of Appeals must, unless the applicant grants an extension, open the public hearing and within 30 days. That's not a ton of time, but that is the first component of the schedule, and we'll get into in a minute or two what I generally would like to recommend when that happens. When that happens, usually all other boards are provided with copies of the application, and then the hearing commences. That hearing can stay open only for 180 days unless the applicant agrees to extend it. Now, the applicant does have to provide requisite information in that 180 days, but you have 6 months to essentially to conduct a hearing under 40B. And it seems like a lot, but for a board that might meet on one of these once a month, it goes pretty quick. And don't forget, because the board is reviewing everything that other boards would review, you will be reviewing things like the civil engineering for drainage. You will be reviewing traffic. So you will be hearing from experts from them on both sides and experts on your side, which we'll get to in a moment as well. And then, goes on from there, design experts, environmental experts, sewer, water experts. There can be any number of it. And those issues are intensely technical. In addition to that, you're going to have to go through some of the more like local impact issues, like how does it fit in with the neighborhood? What's the impact to the neighbors? Those kinds of things that we deal with normally in any particular project that might be before the Zoning Board of Appeals. So 6 months goes pretty quick. So it's really important to do a lot of work there. When you close that hearing, assuming it doesn't get extended, but when you close that hearing, you have 40 days to make a decision. Not a lot of time. These decisions, and I'm not sure if Sarah forwarded it, I forwarded a simple decision. They can be lengthy and they have to cover everything that you need under 40B. So we normally need to meet at least once, usually twice during that 40 days to get through this. Now, I will, and it's pursuant to our fee anyway, but I will be happy to be, or someone from the firm will be attending any public hearing that you have on these to help give guidance as you move along. But there will be various things that come up that will impact your schedule there. So any questions on just the numeric schedule before I kind of go back to what we sometimes see in terms of structure?
Are there any? Nope.
Okay.
Yep.
So when it comes to the structure of the hearing, it's not altogether that different than other more complex hearings for larger projects that a town may have, except of course that it includes a little bit of everything. And what we generally see on the first night is the applicant more or less just providing a broad overview. That would be my general expectation for an applicant, because the board will not have had much of a chance, except individually, to review the plan. Certainly not a chance to speak with each other about it. A good applicant will meet with staff well in advance to kind of iron out some of the details and the structure of the hearing, but at the very least, we usually start off with just kind of a meet and greet. The other thing that I find to be important at the first session of the hearing is to get a commitment to funding of all the peer review and delegating probably to staff, but maybe the staff and one member of the board, a chair or another member of the board, the selection of peer review consultants, civil engineering, planning, wetlands, whatever. That doesn't mean you can't use your staff as well, but you have an opportunity to do that. So we usually try and lay down those ground rules. And then towards the end of that first session, I think it's also important that we set up what the agenda will be for the next session or two of the public hearing. For example, if you expect that you are going to look at civil engineering first, drainage, other kind of basic site design issues, you might say, we want to hear from your engineer on day one. We'll get our engineer started, but we want to hear from your engineer on day one. It could be traffic on day one, depending upon the project. That may be the bigger issue for you, so you may choose to do that. And then you may say, we'll go into whatever next. The last thing you may do on opening night, I think it's a good thing to do, but you're not required to do it, is take a few comments from the public. The public is entitled at some point during the public hearing, and usually throughout the public hearing, but it's not guaranteed in every session, to give their comments, positive or negative, on the project. So you don't have to reserve hours for that, but if for the last half hour of that first session, you say, okay, we're going to get some public comment, the usual, whatever you do, 5 minutes a piece, however you do that, I think it's a good opportunity to let the public feel involved. And you'll learn a little bit as well about how this is shaping up in terms of impacts to that neighborhood. Now, knowing that the public isn't generally particularly a fan of Chapter 40B projects, you may hear more negative than positive. You may also hear during that component of the hearing comments from staff on things like the affordable housing components, if there's a valuable affordable housing component, or if things they can improve on, if there's a wetland impact or some kind of other infrastructure impact. That first session may set the table for that, but it's not going to answer all the questions. And then you go into your next sessions. Their expert will do their civil engineering or traffic report or whatever, and then that will be followed by either at that session or the next session from our peer review consultant. And those consultants, which we normally allow, unless there's bad blood in some way, we normally allow them to speak to each other outside of the hearing. They will whittle down the issues on each of those things, whether it's civil engineering, drainage, wetlands, traffic, parking, design stuff. All of that kind of gets whittled down between the experts, as well as the board will offer their things. And each one of those sessions, you may choose, for example, on traffic, to say, okay, we had two experts battling back and forth on traffic issues. We're going to hear tonight from the public or staff on traffic, but just traffic, because we want to stay on message and keep it going along those lines. And that's really how it proceeds, kind of until we get the technical stuff done. Once we get the technical stuff done, I think it's important, and let me also stress that every board has a different cadence, a different way of doing things. I'm not suggesting a structure that I think the board is tied to, or a method that the board's chair should follow. If you have a particular way of doing business and talking and allowing comments in, that is your prerogative. This is just kind of general structural stuff that I see often, but you should always feel free and should run the hearings the way you're used to holding them, keeping in mind some of the ground we have to cover and the constraints that we have on time and under the statute. So at some point, however, we're going to finish with the technical stuff. And along the way, we will maybe have expressed some opinions like, I need a bigger setback there, or you need some more parking, or it's a little too tall, or something similar to that. Reorient the entrance a little bit because there's a conflict there. That stuff is going to happen during that process. But at a certain point, you're going to want to discuss during the, a little bit past the halfway point, usually of your hearing, however long that lasts. For a small project, that might be a couple of sessions. For a big project, we could be 4 or 5 months in. You're going to want to say, okay, here we are. Here's things we'd like to see from you by way of conditions on the project. Sometimes with 40B, and the most common thing that we see in 40B is it's too big, either structurally too big or there's too many units. There are other issues too, but let's talk about just size or density. And if you have a concern, generally speaking, like we think this project should be downsized, you may think it should be increased in size, but let's just say for argument's sake, do you think it should be downsized, either structurally because it's too tall, or the number of units needs to decrease by a few? We usually go in clumps of 4 because 25% of the units are affordable, but let's say you decide it needs to be a little smaller as a project. They then can say, okay, we agree with that. If we're heading towards an approval, we can shave a little off. And that's a good result. And a good developer will make some concessions to get to an approval in a fairly expedient way. If the developer says, I can't do it, it breaks the bank for us. We're already operating on a shoestring, and they might be. Usually land costs are a big factor. Costs of development, especially on the Cape, can be a big factor. But they might say, no, we can't. If they say, no, they can't, then you are allowed to, A, require that they provide economic analysis from an expert on why they can't with those conditions, the reduced density, the reduced size, whatever it may be. They are required to produce a pro forma, an updated pro forma. They will have done one at the beginning of the project, but this would be an updated one based upon what you may want to see them change. You can then get peer review from your own consultant on that pro forma. Now, the way that those pro formas are viewed are somewhat developer friendly, but there are instances I see fairly frequently where we say, okay, we're not really that far off. I think you can afford to do this. Maybe we meet in the middle. That's when those later stages of the hearing, we have that discussion on feasibility. There's some horse trading. Okay, if we let you do your density, we need you to address this impact. That's when that kind of late stage interplay that we see in other development formats as well, but we see a lot in 40B. In fact, the guidelines issued by the state on this really directly recommend that the parties negotiate. And that's because there is no limit or prescribed size or scope or configuration of 40B projects. People can come in and do whatever they want. Whereas under your local zoning bylaws, there are some limitations. So here it's more of a blank canvas, and the state recognizes that and recommends that the parties do negotiate, even if at the end of the day, if the negotiation fails, they may take the developer's side. It is encouraged that the parties try and work things out. And we very often spend the last month or two of a public hearing doing that kind of dance with developers. Now, everyone may agree on everything, and I certainly do a lot of 40B projects like that, and there's no real need to that. You just get into the usual boilerplate conditions regarding the waivers of the local bylaw, what it's going to look like, what the plan submissions, inspections, hours of operation and construction, all that stuff. So that's not in every case. In many cases, we have things that go much smoother, but often we end up doing some kind of negotiation in those later stages. And then when the hearing closes, the board will usually give me or someone from my firm an indication, hey, here's where I think we may be going. Why don't you draft up like an approval or a denial and along with these conditions, and let's get back together in 2 weeks and take a look at it. And then from there, we go and finalize a decision from there. So that's kind of a nutshell. I'm happy to speak about specific issues and what we've seen on some of this out there in both in projects as well as in litigation. But that's more or less the process that we see. There's a lot of technical stuff in there too, but that's usually more for the lawyers after the process unfolds. So anyone have any questions on process?
Does anyone? Yes, Ed, please.
I guess my question's on peer review. Who actually decides on the consultants we would use, and whose ultimate responsibility is to pay for those consultants?
So under Chapter 44, Section 53G, which applies to comprehensive permits, you decide. You and you alone decide, and you decide the scope. Sometimes there's a bit of a debate on the scope, and it's not subject to procurement. It is exempted from procurement. So you can pick the consultant that you want. That consultant happens to be a little more expensive, but has the knowledge base that you want to see, you pick. And before that person can even start, they have to fund it. And the statute says that if they refuse to fund it, and most fund it, and even though it can be fairly expensive for civil engineering and traffic, if they refuse to fund it, that is an area where you are allowed pursuant to statute to deny a project for failing to fund peer review.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, other questions? I was going to ask that same question, and I'm wondering, would you be willing to give us a pool of recommended experts for all the different topics that we're going to need? Is that
Oh, yeah.
something that council usually does?
Well, I mean, certainly, I think staff probably can help with some of that too, because there's going to be some local favorites that staff may like to use maybe on the civil engineering or the environmental. But I certainly have a number of traffic experts, for example, that are very used to Chapter 40B and that I think understand it. I also know a lot of civil engineers and wetland consultants and design consultants who review 40Bs that would be good at this. I've been doing this for a few decades and have a decent Rolodex that I can help with, and I'd be happy to.
So it sounds like we're going to need at least a half a dozen of these professionals. Let's just say, for example, and so the applicant foots the bill for all of it, and they have to?
100%.
100%.
They
So
have to.
we pick the people and we send them the bill. And we don't have to worry about that.
That's not to say there won't be like some sticker shock by an applicant, perhaps, but we usually find our way around it.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
but yeah, it's 100% an obligation, and it's, it's not inexpensive. A civil engineer for a 50-unit project, for example, that is going to be 20 grand more probably when they're done. A traffic engineer, 10, 15, 20 grand. And if we get into design work or wetlands work, those things are not inexpensive.
And they come to whatever meeting is applicable to that topic that night, that day.
Right. So they will generally build within their scope of services and the amount that they're quoting attendance at so many work sessions and so many public hearing sessions. And if you think they may be needed at more, then fine. Also, if you exhaust the original allotment of funds, but the applicant does a change or provides additional information and we've run out of money to pay that consultant, we are allowed to tell the applicant they have to supplement. So we're not bound by that original amount.
Okay, David Nixon.
Yeah, I'm confused, I think, as to the leeway we have. Well, I'm confused about a lot of things, but when it comes to the leeway we have when we make a decision. So I'll lay out a possible scenario here in town where a developer could very well want 6 market rate homes and offers 2, acceptable housing units. And so we think about it and we take a vote and we say, well, we'll give you those market rate homes, but we want 25 units in addition to that. And that's the decision we make. Now, they didn't ask for it, but that's the decision we make that I presume would then go to the HAC. Is that correct? Or
Well, it goes to the HAC if the applicant appeals. So, those are the kinds of things that I imagine that if that was in the offing, like a significant change in a unit count, either positive or negative, that would be a discussion that we'd probably be having with them at some point during the hearing. So we'd probably get a preview as to whether or not that's something they could or want to do at all, in which case we can discuss our strategy when it's time to deliberate and close the hearing, or even before that, and say, okay, but this is really important to us. I don't care if they don't like it. We want to do it. Or, well, maybe there's another way at this. Maybe we can meet in the middle. So I've certainly been in situations where it's been a little bit of card playing, where an applicant says, I can't live with 4 less units. You want to take 4 less units off. And I'm like, I think you can afford it. Or my board says that. And I say, I tell you what, the board talks about it, and I said, we're just going to reduce it by 4 units and see if they appeal. And for an applicant to appeal on over 4 units is somewhat unlikely. So it really depends on the situation, but you can impose pretty much any conditions you like. There's no limit to the scope of kind of land use related conditions that you can put on a project. You should be backing it up as to the reason why you're doing it, but you can, sky's the limit. These decisions are lengthy and they can be, I'm working on one right now. I sent you guys a pretty simple one. I'm working on one right now that is pushing like 30 pages and has a lot of if this, then that kind of conditions. And it can get pretty complicated.
Okay, so that answers my question, that we have a lot of leeway when it comes to our decision that might not be what the applicant wants. And as you point out, maybe there should be some discussion along the line, but that doesn't mean we would vote that way or that they would accept it. But, okay. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, I mean, you've been doing this, for a while, David. So, these are bigger projects, obviously, but we work with applicants. It's not unusual for this board or any other board to sometimes say, hey, how do you feel about changing that a little bit? Whether it's a simple addition to a pre-existing non-conforming house or something else. This is just by magnitude larger, but it's not altogether a different animal.
The couple that I've been involved with here the discussion always was how many market rate units and then how many affordable units, and they always wanted to go one way and we always wanted to go the other way, but this could very well, my brain is thinking the other way around, that we would want more than they would want to do. So anyway, thank you.
Yep.
More questions? Yes, please, Ed.
Just as a follow-up on the peer review, so I assume those costs for the consultants being borne by the developer, that's part of his overall cost. So he could come back and say, your consultant cost was X, therefore we have to add a unit or add 2 units or something. That's part of his overall cost, correct?
Well, yes, but if I think that by and large, a typical development pro forma that they're required to provide on the front end is going to have some amount of soft costs that are dedicated to peer review. But you're right. If it ends up being $50,000 more than they budgeted for, then that's going to go on the cost side of the ledger. And if it's in a small project, in a large project, $50,000 isn't going to make a huge difference. In a small project, an extra $50,000 in costs might have the impact of disabling the board from really getting everything it wants because the applicant has already spent that money, so to speak. I think the value of peer review, assuming you approach it reasonably given whatever site it is on, is more valuable than the implications of $10,000, $20,000 more in costs, because that's when you get smart about a project.
I have more questions, so does anyone else?
I do have.
Yes, please, Paul. Go
One
ahead.
question. Jay, one of the issues that always seems to come up in dealing with these kinds of projects is the ability to restrict eligibility to people who are either residents of Chatham or have a particular tie with Chatham. Can you just address what the legal implications are around those areas?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It used to be, up until about 10, 15 years ago, that we would just put a provision in every single comprehensive permit that states that 70% of the affordable units shall be reserved for the first tier of the lottery for either local residents or like local teachers, firemen, policemen, DPW workers, whatever. And the state pushed back on that ultimately and said, you are allowed to do a local preference, but following the comprehensive permit, what you have to do is demonstrate to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, EOHLC, that you need local preference. There's an unmet need for either local residents or local employees. If you can demonstrate that pursuant to specific criteria, they will let you do it. If it's more of a regional problem, they will not let you do it. Now, generally speaking, what we try and do with developers is commit them to helping us post-permit make the case for local preference by having a demographer or a planner help us or help our planning staff make that presentation to EOHLC so that we could gain local preference. But without that approval by EOHLC, we can't just do local preference. So it's been a bit of a change, but it's a really good question.
Anything? So I just want to touch a little bit upon the structure of the meeting, if we could, Counsel.
Sure.
Right now, we have a very specific structure that, as you probably know, David Nixon set up and I'm following along with, and we enjoy that. This sounds a little different. It sounds more like just questions and answers, and we don't really get to deliberations until, the very end when we're done with them, essentially. But I guess what I'm a little worried about is the public comment portion, because right now in our rules, we allot 5 minutes, and I'm wondering, do people just come up and talk, or do they interact with the applicant at all?
No.
I think what would probably be helpful for me is if I can listen to this Millis one that you sent us. I could listen to a bunch of the hearings and watch how they do it. If you could send that at all.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that, and please call me Jay, but what I would say is that the level of interaction during your hearing is very much the prerogative of the chair of the board at the meeting. I represent boards where the chair has the strictest possible rules that no one will speak unless recognized by them, and every comment has to go straight through them, and there'll be no follow-up questions unless they say so, and they have a clock on everyone. I have other
I kind of like that, being honest with you. That's my,
I mean,
yeah, I do that.
I'm a town moderator, so in my town, so I tend to be kind of strict on those things. But other board chairs are a little more freewheeling, and there's no requirement here on what you do or don't do. They might allow it to get a little more conversational. In a really complex hearing, if you let it get too conversational, you waste a lot of time and you lose a little control. Again, these are going to be, you have an active audience generally, probably. These are going to be complex and likely controversial projects, whenever you get one, whether it's soon or next year or whenever. So controlling the amount of discourse, not just by the public, but also by the experts, and having everyone stick to the rules will help you get through this quicker. You have to allow the public to speak, but you can like say, look, this is complicated. Everyone's going to get to speak. You can say on a night, let's say you have a night on civil engineering and it's really getting late or whatever, and it's complicated. Say, okay, we're not going to do public comment tonight, but we'll do it next night. You're not required to give them comment every single night. Usually you find a way to allow a comment or two, but it's up to you.
But we could shorten them.
There's no guarantee.
We could shorten
There's
it from
no
the 5
guarantee.
to 3, perhaps. We can use our discretion for that.
You
As
can
long as we
use your
say it in
discretion.
advance. Yeah, okay, that sounds
You
great.
could say, we've got 20 minutes tonight for public comment. We have 10 minutes tonight for public comment. We get a minute at the mic. you can be as strict or as non-strict as you may want to be. I mean, me personally, I'm a little bit strict, but there's a winning formula for being a little more conversational too.
I just, to be clear, I want to give all the public a chance. I just worry about 5 minutes apiece, because we could be here all night, so that.
Well, then make the rules, as long as everyone understands. So this is not like public forum where people get to be a little more freewheeling. The agenda item that they're speaking to can be narrow, and the time allotted to them can be very narrow too. And if it's civil engineering night and not housing density night, then, and someone strays into some other category like density or environmental or traffic, you could say, no, we're just civil engineering only tonight. We have an issue on drainage or, whatever, site design, things like that, then that's what we're going to talk about tonight. So being regimented can really be beneficial.
Oh, thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Do you want to go on to any other topics? It's almost 4:15. I think it's going on 4:10. It's up to you. Jay?
Me?
Yes.
Oh, on 40B? No, I mean, I think this is a good starter. I hope everyone gets a chance to read that decision I did for Millis, the town of Millis. It kind of gives you, because it'll lay out where we were with procedure and the various issues that we will address within a permit. I am available, as folks know. You would work through your staff if folks have questions, or the chair, and I will be happy to respond and do follow-up as need be. And again, when this gets to be a real thing, or 1 or 2 or 3 or however many projects are coming down the pike, I want to be there, or have one of my land use associates from my firm be there to help all along the way.
Oh, great. And last thing, I don't know about, you heard me before, but I was wondering if this Millis application, how many hearings they had, and are they publicized somewhere on YouTube or somewhere?
I don't know if they're cable access. I'll see if that one isn't available. I'll see if I can find one that is available for you. That one probably didn't take a full 180 days because it was a relatively small project. I'm working on one now. I'm working on the decision now for the town of Southborough, where we were at the public hearing for more than a year, so more than double the amount of time. And that's because the applicant ran into trouble on a wetland issue and then a land issue, and it just kept getting continued. Very often these things go well in excess. So I think the Millis one probably was under 180 days, but I have some that go well beyond.
Yeah, well,
100.
if you have any seaside, small towns, that would be probably helpful as well. Towns with the kind of populations that we have, that might be helpful. But thank you, though. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I've done some in Yarmouth. I've done some on Martha's Vineyard. I've done a bunch in Sandwich. So we have some other examples that are out there that we'd be happy to get you.
Oh, thank you, thank you. If there's nothing else, I'm going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
David seconds and votes yes.
Ed?
Ed votes yes.
Yes.
All vote yes.
Lee?
I vote yes.
Steve votes yes.
Ginny votes yes.
As do I. We're adjourned. Thank you so much. Jay Talaman.
Hey, thank you. We'll talk to you all soon.